Welcome to the Anthem Church podcast. Our desire is to transform lives through authentic experiences with God and with people. This message is brought to you from Anthem Church in Fairview, Oregon. We pray you are encouraged, inspired, and strengthened through the teaching and preaching of God's Word.
Or maybe you're in your faith and you feel a tug to step out into a new area of ministry or into a deeper relationship with him. Let's be honest, it's hard. Just like Simon Peter in today's narrative, we know the fear and hesitation of putting ourselves out there, especially when we don't have guaranteed results. Now, for Simon, obviously, it wasn't about ziplining. It was about fishing. And yet the fear of failure, his frustration from his past experiences, and the uncertainty of what's next weighed heavily on him, just like it can weigh heavily on us. Luke chapter 5, let's keep reading. Luke chapter 5, verses 4 through 5 says this. That is small. I'll have to talk to myself about that next time I preach. Sorry about that. When he had finished speaking, he being Jesus, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered and said, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But I will do as you say and let down the nets." Simon Peter, he'd been fishing all night long and he had caught nothing. There is nothing more frustrating than going out and expecting to catch fish and catching nothing. Especially if you toil at it and you work hard at it and like this is your profession. This is what you do. He was tired, he was frustrated, and Simon Peter was ready to go home. And then Jesus asked him to go out into the deep water and let down the nets. Peter's response was honest. He said, "We've worked hard all night. We haven't caught anything." He'd already tried. He'd already failed. And he was being asked to go out to the same place that he had just been again. But he says, "But I will do as you say and let down the nets." Peter's response, it captures that tension that we all face. The fear of failure, especially in light of previous experience, versus the call to trust God. Peter had just spent a very fruitless night fishing. Yet when Jesus told him to put out into the deep water, Peter obeyed, even though it didn't make sense. Yancy and I, during the summer, there's Sundays where you didn't see us because we like to fish. We like to fish a lot. And so I know that feeling of going out and you're hanging out in the spot and you're like, well, the fish were here last time, but all of a sudden the fish aren't there. And you're like going around, we changed bait. What are you trying? Kind of listening in on other people. What are they trying? There is nothing more frustrating than not catching when you know that the fish are there. That's where they're supposed to be. And that's exactly what happened to Peter. Peter went out. He'd been out all night. Jesus was saying, "Oh, let's go back to that spot." You know, that spot where you don't see any fish jumping and where you didn't catch any fish the night before. And it just didn't make sense, but Peter said yes. That's the decision that we all face in moments of uncertainty. Will we let the fear of past failure dictate our choices, or will we trust God and act on his word, even when it challenges our understanding? Now, in the story that we're looking at today, Jesus tells Peter, "Put out into the deep water." In that moment, Jesus is inviting Peter to take a risk, to step out of a comfort zone, and to trust him, even though Peter had already spent the whole night fishing with no luck. Think about this. Peter was a seasoned fisherman. He knew the waters, he knew the best time to fish, and it certainly wasn't in the middle of the day. And he'd been working all night with nothing to show for it. He'd already been skunked. And then all of a sudden, Jesus, not a fisherman, in fact, a carpenter by trade, comes to him and says, "Hey, let's go out. We're going to go back out there. I don't care that you've been there all night. I don't care that's where there was no fish there earlier. We're going to go back out there." Oh, now look, Peter and I have a lot in common. I can relate to Peter. If I were Peter, I would have been like, mind, and on top of the fact that he was already tired and frustrated, Jesus did not promise that his plan was going to work. There was no guarantee given. Jesus didn't say, hey, Peter, go put out into the deep water and you are going to catch the biggest fish that you've ever caught in all of your life. There was no guarantee. He just said, put out into the deep water. What Jesus was asking Peter to do, it was not just about a physical action of throwing the nets back out. It was about trusting, even when it seemed pointless. It was about letting go of what Peter already knew and taking a risk, trusting in Jesus' word, even when the situation didn't make sense. Jesus was asking Peter to take a chance, step out into the unknown without any guarantee of success, but trusting that Jesus knew better than he did. So here's a point that I want you to take away from today. God doesn't call us to safety. He calls us to obedience. God's call is rarely about playing it safe. He does not promise a trouble-free life. Instead, he calls us to take steps of faith, trusting that he is with us. Obedience often requires risk. There is no safe way to follow Jesus. It takes courage. Think of Moses. Now, Moses was this guy in the Old Testament. If you want to brush up on it, you can go home today and rent Prince of Egypt and get like the full story. But here's Moses. And Moses was being asked by God to go and speak to Pharaoh, the highest authority in the land, to let the Israelites free. Moses was like, I don't think so, God. God's like, no, yeah, this is what I want you to do. You're going to go and you're going to talk to Pharaoh, and you're going to tell him, based on your authority, that he's going to let the people free. God asked Moses to confront Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt, but Moses was reluctant. He was scared, and inside he's like, I'm not qualified to do that. He even tried to talk God out of it in Exodus, which is back in the Old Testament. Exodus chapter 4, verse 10 says this. Then Moses said to the Lord, please, Lord, like, can you hear him whining? Please. Please. I've never been eloquent. Not now, nor in time past, nor since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Now, could you imagine trying to tell God that he picked the wrong person? I think that took more courage than doing what God had actually asked him to do. But Moses obeyed, and through his obedience, God did miraculous things, and eventually, again, because of Moses' obedience, the people of Israel were set free from being slaves in Egypt. Sometimes God asks us to do things that feel beyond us, but he promises to be with us every step of the way. All he's asking for is that we will take a step out in obedience. He has a word, he asks us to do something, and he wants us to step out and obey. Back to our story for today. Peter's decision to trust God, to trust Jesus, was an act of obedience. He did not know what the outcome would be, and he certainly did not obey out of any feeling of excitement or anticipation of something great. He only knew that Jesus had asked him to take that next step, to launch into the deep. Luke chapter 5, verses 5 through 6 says this. Simon answered and said, Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but I will do as you say and let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish. In other words, they took in a big haul. They caught a ton of fish, and their nets began to break. So here's the second point that I want you to take home with you today and to be considering. Risk, when done in obedience, it reflects a trust in God. You see, the real power in this story isn't just the miraculous catch of the fish, but in Peter's decision to trust Jesus, even when it didn't make sense. His choice, again, to obey, it was not based on any promise of success. It was not based on, if you do this, then I'm going to do this for you. It was simply a call to obey, blindly, out of faith, and trust in the Lord. When Peter decided to go out into the deeper water, he showed a kind of faith that went beyond what he could understand or he could see. And that's what faith is. When things don't make sense, Jesus asked us to do things and it doesn't make sense. And yet when we go anyway, that's faith. You see, that huge catch, it was not a reward for doing what Jesus said. You know, I remember when my kids were little, and none of my kids are here today, so I actually can tell a couple stories. When they were little, you know, it was, well, if you do your chores, you get a sticker, and if you get 5 stickers, then you get, you know, this reward, right? Like, they were conditioned, for lack of a better word, to obey because of the future reward. And that's how a lot of us are. Like, in the workplace, we're conditioned to show up to work because when we do, we get the reward of a paycheck, right? But that's not how Jesus works. Jesus calls us to an act of obedience with no guarantee of a reward. The truth is this: stepping out in faith, it does not always lead to immediate results or even visible rewards. Sometimes the success we hope for doesn't happen the way or when we expect it. Take Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. For example, the night before his crucifixion, Jesus was getting ready to be arrested. He knew it was coming, and he knew it was going to be awful. And what did he say? For those of you who know the Easter story, he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says, "Not my will, but yours be done." He obeyed. He made the choice to obey the Lord, and still had to die on the cross, because that was what God's plan was. You see, there's never a guarantee that things are going to be a bed of roses just because we always obey the Lord. Through Jesus' obedience, God's bigger plan was carried out. And I say that to you today. Through your obedience, God is working out his plan through you for something bigger and better. God is faithful. Say that with me. God is faithful. He honors our obedience, and it doesn't always come with immediate success. Instead, he offers his presence, and he offers his peace, and the reassurance that no matter what, he is with us through it all. Stepping out in faith, it means trusting that God is working even when we don't see it. Our obedience does not always bring visible blessings right away, and that can be hard to accept. Obeying isn't about getting guarantees. It's about growing closer to God. When Peter took his boat into deep water, he had no idea what would happen next. In fact, in his mind, he was thinking, this is stupid. This is one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I know there's no fish, and yet I'm going to go right back to where we had been all night long, and whatever. You know, I think Peter was probably like, let's see, I'm going to prove to you that I know better because I'm the fisherman and you're not. I can't wait till I get to heaven and be like, hey Peter, let's talk about some of these things. How'd that work out for you? The blessing might not always look like a big catch or even a clear outcome. I know that there's been times in our lives lives where we have obeyed the Lord? Okay, I'm going to tell a story. When Nancy and I first started in ministry, we didn't know about tithing. One of my friends refers to it as tipping. We would tip when we went to church. We got $20, we'll put in $20. We didn't know about tithing. And then somebody taught us about tithing, and we're like, oh, okay, we're going to try this out. And so we were tithing. And no lie, because we knew that we were being faithful to the Lord and obedient, we were 100% convinced, sorry babe, that we were going to win the Publishers Clearinghouse. We were convinced. And we had the first $1 million already laid out, and of course it was all going to Jesus, and it was all going to bring glory to the Lord, and of course honor our parents by paying off their mortgages, and blah blah. But we were convinced, and this was the year. We sat at home. We were invited to Super Bowl parties. This is back when the Publishers Clearinghouse used to do this during the Super Bowl. We did not go to any Super Bowl parties. We stayed at home because we wanted to be home when the van drove down the driveway. And we lived down this long, dirty, dusty driveway, so we knew that we would see when a car was coming down because we'd see the dirt coming down. We were sitting there. We were waiting. We were ready because we had been faithful. And let me tell you, back then, money was tight. We lived on beans and rice and Jesus Christ at that time in our lives. So Publishers Clearinghouse would have been very, very, very good. Guess what? Didn't happen. But it didn't change the fact that we knew that God was doing other things. We had chosen to obey the Lord in this principle of tithing, and in doing so, God was working out some other things. We have tons of stories. Maybe someday I'll get to share some of them. You see, sometimes the biggest blessing is that change that God is making in us, teaching us patience, building our trust, and helping us rely on Him more fully. Obedience brings us closer to God, and that connection is worth more than any haul that we could ever bring in. What is God calling you to do that feels risky? Whatever it is, God is calling you to trust Him even when it feels scary. Like Peter, He's asking you to launch out into the deep. And here's the truth. The risk is worth it because God always rewards obedience. You may not see the blessing right away, but when you step out in faith, you can trust that God is working something greater than you could ever imagine. Now it's your turn. It's your turn to launch into the deep. And some of you just have this overwhelming sense of dread, like, oh my gosh, what is she going to ask me to do? Fear has a powerful way of holding us back, convincing us that we're not capable or that the risk isn't worth it. It whispers all the reasons why something's not going to work out. That's what fear does. But here's the truth. You have a choice. You have a choice today. You have a choice tonight. You have a choice tomorrow. You have a choice forever. You do not have to stay in the shallow waters where it feels comfortable. You can choose to trust God even when it feels uncertain and launch into the deep. So ask yourself, will you let fear keep you stuck? Or will you trust God enough to move into the deep waters? We're going to do 3 action steps. Action step number 1. Identify the area of fear. Right now, I want you to take a moment and I want you to reflect on your life. Where is fear keeping you stuck? Ask yourself, what's that one thing that's been holding you back because it just feels too risky or it's uncertain and there's no guarantee? Whatever it is, I want you to bring it to mind right now. I want you to write it down. Think about what is that area of fear that's keeping me back. Naming it is the first step in overcoming it. Action step number 2. Commit to trusting God. Now that you've identified your fear, I want you to make the decision to trust God. I want you to make the decision to say, Lord, I believe. I'm going to jump in. Peter, he could have stayed in the shallow waters. He could have said, Jesus, I am tired. I've already tried. I know this isn't going to work. But instead he said, because you say so, I will. And because he obeyed, he experienced the miraculous. You might not know what the outcome will be, but God is calling you to trust him. And so as you're thinking today, as you've identified that fear that's holding you back, that's keeping you stuck and paralyzed on the platform or in the shallow water, depending on which analogy you want to be swimming with right now, I'm going to invite you right now to stand and say, I am not going to be held back. Because you say so, I will. Do you have a fear today and you want the Lord to help you overcome that fear and you're ready to not let that fear hold you back? Would you stand right now? Choose obedience over comfort. Push out a little and watch how God shows up. Because you say so, I will. Let that be your declaration as you symbolically launch into the deep waters of faith today. Action step number 3. Share it with someone. Don't walk this journey alone. Share your decision with someone. If you're not standing, take a look around and go to that person and say, God, lead me to the person that I'm going to walk with. And as you're standing today, know that you're not going to be doing this alone. God calls us to be doing this together. Share your decision with someone, a trusted friend, a family member, somebody here at church. One of the things that I love about Anthem Church is that at the end, during that response time, you'll see back on the back walls, there's lighted crosses. There are people that will be standing back there that will pray with you. They will hear what your fear is. They will hear you talk about what's holding you back, and they will commit to praying with you. They will hold you accountable. They will walk that journey with you. Tell them what God is calling you to do and ask them. We were not meant to do life in isolation. We were created for community. And part of that is encouraging one another to take bold steps of faith. By sharing your decision, you're inviting someone to walk with you, to pray for you, and to celebrate you when God moves. Let me pray for you real quick right now. Lord God, we thank you for your truth.
Thank you for joining us. We are located at 1415 Northeast 223rd Avenue in Fairview, Oregon. You can find us online at www.anthemfamily.org and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. God bless.